When I first thought about this topic, I thought about boiled turnips and frozen Brussels sprouts.
Ugh.
And then I realized it wasn't a horror story. And then I felt, oh my goodness, I don't have a story that lasts 8 minutes. A dysfunctional family around a dinner table like in August, Osage County, the movie and play where they actually break into fisticuffs. I saw the play in Tucson, and the food came flying off the stage into the audience during the food fight on stage. But what I do have is stories of love. And I do have a conflict story. When I was growing up, my parents, who were passionately in love, my dad used to come home for lunch, much to my mother's happiness. But they also were passionate in their feelings about who was right and who was wrong, and they were both right all the time. And this acted out most at the dinner table, where the conflicts bubbled up. And it was not unusual for there to be screaming and yelling going on at dinner, and one of my younger siblings busting into tears, and my 12-year-old sister having an ulcer at that age.
Oh.
And I learned very quickly that despite the love and their expression of it, this was not always where I wanted to be. So I learned to eat very quickly, because when you were done, you could leave the table. And I happily did. I have very warm memories of my grandparents who lived in a town of 500 people in southern Indiana. And I would go there and spend summers and some of the holidays sometimes. And I would wake up in the morning and Grandpa would already have gone to work. And Grandma would sit across from me at the long formica table. And she would make herself eggs and bacon using drippings from the can. And I would sit at the other end of the table eating rolled oats. I have no idea what that means to this day. How you roll oats, I don't know. But she would tell stories, and it would be about my mother and her and Grandpa and cakewalks and church socials and buggy rides and how they met. And I have that history with me now, told at the breakfast table by Grandma. And then around lunchtime, she would make my grandpa's lunch, which was always a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a pickle loaf and mustard sandwich on white sliced bread, wrapped up individually in wax paper and put in a little brown paper bag so I could walk the block and a half on the cracked sidewalks with the sycamore trees over me and go to Grandpa's garage that he owned and managed, where he was the mechanic. And on the way, I would stop at Wells Grocery and get 2 cold bottles of Pepsi.
Oh.
And I would go to Grandpa's garage, and he would close up the garage and put the roll-top desk down, and we would go in the back. And we would sit around the pot-belly stove, which was not on fire during the summer. And Grandpa would eat his sandwiches, and the farmers would come in, and they would talk about crop failures. And this I never understood. They talked about cougar sightings. And I thought, this is like southern Indiana Bigfoot. Because I never saw proof of a cougar sighting. There was basic food in Indiana: sliced tomatoes, corn on the cob, mashed potatoes, lots of boiled stuff. Okay, lots of pork, lots of chicken. And like Grandma and I would sit on the front porch and snap green beans in the porch swing. And the cars would go by in this little town of 500 people, and she knew every car and every person, and usually where they were going. Because it was a town of 500 people. They had holiday dinners at my grandparents' house and the usual fare at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But my favorite part is where Grandma had to go get the chicken that was fattening up in a wooden cage between the outhouse and coal house. Yep. And she would go out and she would pull the chicken out of the cage and she would wrap its feet up and hang it on the clothesline and whack, cut its head off. Although sometimes, even more exciting, she would put it on the ground, hold it by its feet, take a hoe, and pull its head off. And the chicken would get up and dance around like a chicken with its head cut off. And the blood would be spurting everywhere, and I was so excited. Because children are bloodthirsty, we all know this. No doubt about it. And of course there was a children's table as well, and I graduated eventually to the adult table. I met my partner David in 1971, also from Indiana, at a Christmas dinner where he gave grace. And I remember that because it was unexpected. It was an old hippie farm community in Indiana. I was teaching high school. And at some point, 2 years into our relationship, he said, "Why don't we move to New Orleans?" And I said, "Why not?" Because after all, we were like 24 and 25. Anything's possible. And we moved to New Orleans, and I discovered there were spices. Because in Indiana, all we had was salt and pepper, and maybe a little paprika on a macaroni salad. But in New Orleans, there was jambalaya and gumbo and shrimp etouffee and beignets and stuffed mirliton and crawfish. And it was amazing. And David and I created a family of chosen family in New Orleans. And we decided during our 50 plus years together that we would go on a journey. And we would live in places that were culturally different than Indiana and everything is. And we went to San Francisco. And for the first time I had Thai food and dim sum and sushi. And then we moved to Washington, D.C., and I discovered there was Ethiopian food that you ate with your hands. And then I had salmon fresh from the stream in Seattle for the first time. And then we moved to Tucson, and there were Mexican-American food, but even more people selling tamales out of the back of their trucks. This was wonderful. Our favorite meal was New Year's Day dinner, and David made it for years, wherever we were living. And it would always be corned beef brisket and cabbage, because we were Yankees, not collard greens. Okay. Black-eyed peas, though, and cornbread. And he made this year after year, and we shared it with many, many people. And when we lived in Tucson in 2006, my mother, who was widowed, and all my siblings had gradually migrated there as well. And in January of 2006, David went to my mother's house and made New Year's Day dinner. And it was wonderful. And it was the last dinner we had together as a family because my mother died 2 weeks later. But it's a memory that we cherish. We moved to Athens, and David continued to make New Year's Day dinner. And we lived with our friend Mike, and he made it for Mike and I, and sometimes a couple of other invited guests. And in May, David died. And this year, I made New Year's Day dinner.
Yes.
Mike made the cabbage. And it was full of sadness and love, and I know David would have been so proud. Thank you.